What's up, y'all? It's your boy JTMM, aka JustTenMoreMinutes, aka yes, I still swallowed a frog, dealing with sinus infection, but it is what it is. First of all, Merry Christmas Eve. It is the 24th here. I realize, in other parts of the world, you may be venturing towards that Christmas, especially in our Asia Pacific time zones. But for those, I think the majority of us were still on Christmas Eve. So this is Father. This is one that's been in the backlog. I think I watched it either the day of or the day after the video first came out. And so this one's been sitting back there for me to get to. It's one I'm actually fascinated by because the whole chemical warfare and the whole chemistry thing has always fascinated me in the sense of, what makes people say, hey, what if I combine this and this, right? I mean, it makes sense on one side to say, hey, I'm joining this data set to this data set, and I want to be able to see this to, how this combination works. But when you're talking about something as deadly as these gases, that to me is where it borders lines on evil genius versus, someone that should get a Nobel Prize. And I get why he got it from the sense of I think it was like the oxygenization of the soil or something like that to make it richer for modern day harvesting or something to that point. But yeah, I really struggle with this one. So I'm curious to see the history, if they explain more about that and how we kind of went down the path. So that being said, let's check it out.
Hi there, I'm Pat from Sabaton.
And I'm Indy Nidell.
And today here on Sabaton History Channel, we are premiering a brand new song.
You are hearing it here for the first time.
Father.
Not every legacy is easily distinguishable as good or evil. Sometimes it's more like the light of a candle. The brighter it shines, the longer it casts its shadow. The master chemist Fritz Haber's accomplishments have lifted humanity up as a whole, helping billions of people, yet also caused terrible, agonizing deaths and lifelong suffering for hundreds of thousands of others. It is a legacy seemingly caught between ethics and science, between idolization and condemnation, between home and exile, yet also true to his own credo, in peace for mankind, in war for the fatherland.
Okay.
The Nobel Prize Committee of the Swedish Royal Academy announced its honorees for the years 1914 to 1919, the war years. 5 of those honored were Germans, and among them was Fritz Haber. He was awarded the 1918 Nobel Prize for Chemistry for the groundbreaking achievement of creating synthetic ammonia. Yet, there was a loud roar of outrage by French and British scientists who sent in notes of protest. Haber, they said, was the father of chemical warfare. And yeah, he was that too. Fritz Haber was born in Breslau, Prussia in 1868. His father was a wealthy Jewish businessman who supported early on his son's interest in chemical experiments. Haber studied organic chemistry and physics at the university in Berlin, where he graduated cum laude in 1891 and reached full professor of physical chemistry in 1906. Already then, he was making great strides with his intellect and drive, while boasting that he had never attended a single lecture on physical chemistry except for his own. But he had yet to find his niche. From gas phase chemistry to electrochemistry, his interests were not limited to a single field of research. This would change when he was confronted with what was considered a classic problem, the Malthusian trap, which holds that growth on our planet had a limit, since people multiply exponentially and resources arithmetically, and that the Earth's soil could only feed and sustain a certain number of people. Chemistry and the production of potent fertilizers challenged the Malthusian nightmare. But the question of how to artificially replenish agricultural soil with nitrogen that in turn could be metabolized by plants remained unsolved. For the ambitious Haber, this problem presented the perfect opportunity to leave his mark on the scientific world.
Okay, so it was fertilization. I couldn't think of what that word was. I was trying oxygen in the soil. No, that doesn't make sense in my head as I said it. But yeah, fertilizer was what I was thinking of, but I couldn't think of that actual word. I agree, but I disagree with the other scientist, right? Because of the chemical warfare. And do you dismiss all of the good he did for the bad? I don't know.
Scientists before him had provided theories that the fixation of hydrogen and nitrogen out of the air was indeed possible, yet no one had found the correct amount of pressure, heat, and the right catalyst to do so. Without going into detail, it would be Fritz Haber who finally succeeded where others had failed. Through correct calculations and by adding an osmium catalyst, he achieved the desired gaseous reaction and brought about the equilibrium constant. Eureka! There was ammonia. In cooperation with Bosch, who'd go on to replace the osmium with an iron catalyst and the industrial capacities of BASF, synthetic ammonia would soon be in full production. What is known as the harbor-bosch process would literally change life on Earth, as it made today's population numbers possible. So billions of people can thank Fritz Haber. Even at the time, his discovery elevated Haber to the top of the pops in Germany and beyond. And in 1911, as a group of prominent scientists from the Prussian Academy were thinking of creating an institute for the elite of Germany's intellectuals, it was Haber who was proposed as one of its directors. As the head of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Physical Chemistry and Electrochemistry, Haber would have the first heyday of his career, and science in Germany thrived like it never had before. Like all good things, though, the era of scientific prosperity came to an end, but quickly. The outbreak of the Great War not only put an end to nearly all research that was not vital to the war effort, but it also shattered the previously well-knit international academic community. What was once for the sake of all mankind, leading their research according to principles of the République des Lettres, was now stifled by the demands of warring nations, and scientists were drafted into the chemists' war to build the deadliest weapons of their time. Fritz Haber's research into ammonia was almost immediately of importance for the German war machine. The Kaiser and his generals had planned for a very short war, and German explosives and the propellant industry relied on saltpeter nitrate imports from Chile, which was now blocked off. That problem was overcome by Haber, who was now hailed for creating gunpowder from the air. But this was only the beginning of his involvement in the war.
So this, I mean, up until this point, right? I mean, if you think about, man, this is another tough one. Because if you think about what he did for farmland, right? And being able to create this to where, the ground could be able to take the nutrients, right? And that whole process. I'm okay with that, right? That's great. And I understand his credo, as Indy said, of, peace for all mankind. But once it comes to war, I'm going to stand with my country. It's hard to fault that. I think then you get into the shady part of, okay, how are we going to do that to take out these soldiers? Man, that's a double-edged sword. Because if I'm on that side at that time, You're not worried about these other countries that you're warring with. You're not worried about their people. You're worried about your homeland. That's a double-edged sword. It's hard to say, Fritz, hey, you're a horrible person because you fought for your country and developed something that would give your country an advantage. That's war. Man, that sucks, though. That's a tough one for me.
In the early morning hours of April 22nd, 1915, a greenish-yellow fog, up to 2 meters high, crept towards the Allied lines. It was driven by the wind, and those who smelt it described its sweetish, chloric smell, which was also irritating like pepper. But those who did so were also soon seen coughing, spitting, and retching. Caught in the fog, men clutched their throats, their eyes red with pain, stumbling around in terror. Many simply collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. The Germans had unleashed 160 tons of Haber's newest invention, chlorine gas. As a weapon, the gas attacked the mucous membranes and the wet tissues of lungs, eyes, and throat. This was the advent of modern chemical warfare. No one was quite aware of what kind of Pandora's box had been opened. For Fritz Haber personally, the day was both triumph and tragedy. The German military called Haber a national hero and symbolically promoted him to Hauptmann. His marriage, however, was reaching its darkest point. Like her husband, Clara Haber aspired to leave her mark on the scientific world. She was even the first woman to get a doctorate in chemistry at the University of Breslau, with her thesis on the solubility of heavy metal salts. Heavy metal. Yet, unlike her husband, this did not open the doors of the academic world to her. Although her colleagues were generally supportive, this was not a time when women often found employment in fields like physics or chemistry. Clara worked as a freelancer, but was frustrated over her expected role as a housewife, mother, and hostess to the prominent guests of her husband. Tired and depressed by an unfulfilled life and a dysfunctional marriage, Clara took her own life. On the day when Fritz Haber was hailed a hero by the press, she was found dead by their 13-year-old son. Haber's thoughts about her death remain unknown, and contrary to a lot of public opinion, there is no evidence that Clara's suicide was caused by her husband's involvement in chemical warfare. Either way, Haber left for the Eastern Front the next day to instruct German pioneers on how to deploy his new weapon.
That tells you the mindset, right? And obviously we don't know what he was thinking at the time, but to leave the next day when your child found their mother, that's a really hard one for me, because I've experienced not necessarily the death angle of that, but passed out, drunk, high, all of those kids finding their parent like that. I've experienced that firsthand, being, there's a lot of stuff I've experienced that was very traumatic for my kids. The next day, I'm not taking off anywhere. I could understand delaying it for a couple of days or a week just to make sure that the child is okay. But the next day after the child found their mom, again, it's a different mindset. These guys were in the middle of war, but man, I guess that's why I'm not a soldier. Is family first. It's just, there's not even a question there.
Gas would become one of the most feared weapons of the whole Great War. But although many of Haber's colleagues spoke out against its introduction, calling it a perversion of science and fundamentally abhorrent, it was not universally condemned. In fact, far from it. The Entente was quick to retaliate, of course, turning gas warfare against German soldiers as well. Haber argued that he wanted to primarily break the psychological will of Germany's enemies, much like with the frightening effect of a flamethrower or a bayonet charge. Once the stalemate on the fronts was broken, it would save so many others from the machine guns and artillery shells of a prolonged war. Until the end of the war, the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute would continue to produce other chemical agents, most notably phosgene gas and ypirite, also known as mustard gas. Haber introduced the concept of Buntschießen, where different kinds of gas shells were deployed in an effort to act as mask breakers, right? Like one kind of gas would penetrate the filters, forcing the affected soldier to take off his mask, only to then be hit by an asphyxiating gas shell the next moment. Yet, poison gas ultimately did not shorten the war. Instead, it's estimated that by the war's end, around 1.3 million soldiers were wounded by the effects of chemical weapons, many blinded or with lungs destroyed, many of them killed by asphyxiation or internal bleeding.
And that's where, it goes for me from a brilliant man to an evil scientist, because again, and then I go back and say it's a double-edged sword. I mean, there's huge contradiction there, because he's brilliant. I think you could say that, but then there's this evil side, because to just release that on another human being, but it's war. I mean, that's where this goes back. And this is where I really struggle today with some of the tactics that are being used is, war is not about playing nice, right? It's you're trying to accomplish something and you're trying to get an advantage, and you're going to do that advantage. Now, obviously, there's things in place that can prevent that from being used without, repercussions by the world. But I honestly think that we're getting very, very close to people just not caring and it happening anyway. So my assumption is that, Attack of the Dead Men was around this time frame. So I'm assuming that when he was talking about that morning of, I think it was 1915, that would be that first release that they talked about. With the Attack of the Dead Men. That's my assumption. He didn't really go into it, but that's what I'm thinking. Man, this one's a tough one. Not in the sense of the topic, but it's more of, how do you feel about a guy that changed the world that went on to be evil? And was he evil or just smart in getting the upper hand? And I'm not saying what he did was great, but it's just one of those things you have to really kind of battle back and forth if you look at it realistically, and what he provided the Germans as far as an advantage in that sense. Yeah.
The armistice saw the Entente publish a list of around 900 alleged war criminals they wanted to bring to trial. Haber, as the father of chemical warfare, was among the most wanted. The Hauptmann quickly got out of his uniform and fled to Switzerland. But the charges against him were soon dropped, and returned to his institute in Berlin. In 1920, he was awarded the Nobel Prize for his ammonia synthesis. At the ceremony, no one mentioned his involvement in trying to keep the German war machine afloat, nor how his inventions gave birth to modern gas warfare. Many in Europe's scientific community simply wanted to return to how it was before the war. Haber never showed any signs of remorse. Instead, he turned his full attention to the prosperity of his institute. Under the great Haber, it would attract many world-class scientists and promote new ways of scientific thinking, from embryonic quantum mechanics to gas kinetic studies to the transfer of energy between atoms. There were many branches of science at work here. One somewhat funny project called Gold from Seawater was aimed at combating the Republic's growing debt by extracting gold from the oceans. Okay, although based on a huge miscalculation and soon abandoned, the idea showed how how open-minded the Institute was to unconventional ideas. Supported by prominent sponsors from the industry, Haber would enjoy another heyday, which also came to its end. When the Nazis rose to power in 1933, they soon extended their clutches to Germany's scientific world. Although Fritz Haber had converted to Protestantism when he was 25, he was still a persona non grata to the new state. Hitler personally hated the Jew Haber, who openly supported the democratic principles of the Republic.
Okay.
Yet Haber was too well established to be attacked publicly. Instead, they pressured him with new laws, demanding the Institute fire all scientists of Jewish ancestry. Haber, who believed that science and academia stood above such differences, could not accept this, and instead put in his own resignation letter. Then he was basically banished from the fatherland he had worked tirelessly to save and improve. At first he went to Cambridge University, then toyed with the idea of moving to Palestine, but he could not bring himself to fully break with his German identity. Haber died in Switzerland on January 29, 1934, from a heart attack. To this day, Fritz Haber's legacy remains controversial, at least historically. From a purely scientific viewpoint, his accomplishments in the world of chemistry were indisputably the works of one of the greatest.
Yeah.
The benefits of the harbor-bosch process are enjoyed every day around the globe. But the legacy of the horrors of gas warfare remains a dark shadow over Haber's and mankind's history.
So that's where, okay. That's where, if I look at it just from a pure factual standpoint, right? The process that he helped discover, yes, is a benefit daily. Him wanting to protect his country at all costs, feeling attacked, you know, and defending his fatherland, I can't fault that. To the extent that he went, I don't agree with it, but I get it. Him, you know, being banished by Hitler, that part I didn't know. That I was curious because I wasn't sure the timing is, you know, when they rose to power versus, you know, when he was at his best. That's, yeah, to go from that position, right, and have it to where you're leading this and being successful and putting that, I guess you could say, behind you, and discovering new ways and these of doing things only to be banished by your country, man. For him as a person, that had to be heartbreaking. Just to be turned on like that for a country that you know, work so tirelessly, including the, you know, quite honestly, the death of his wife with the trauma that his kids went through. Yeah, I mean, it's controversial. I get it, but I don't get it at the same time. Let's finish this out.
Father.
Such a good song.
What's coming next from your inventions? We wonder when does it end? Who can foresee? See what will be.
Okay, Per, this song is not on any of the albums. Go.
All right, it's actually like this. So we know that you like a lot of songs from the Great War, and we did as well, and it's a massive...
Huge undertaking.
Yes.
Huge concept.
a huge concept, and there is a lot to sing about.
Yeah.
We knew already when we had finished the Great War that we needed to cover the Christmas truce. But eventually, because of the pandemic, that led to the entire war to end all wars. But we were still not ready with the pandemic, so we still had time on our hands. We were not touring, and we actually recorded more songs. And then we felt these belong in the same universe. This also belongs in World War I, and it will extend throughout the entire tour with new releases that's connecting to the album tours.
Yeah, so the album, the album's been out for a while. The second Great War album, War to End All Wars, and so this is extending the theme even further.
Yes. So we recorded 3 more singles and EPs. Yeah, well, singles, and they're gonna be bundled into EPs, connecting them. So the first one that's come out, this one, Father.
Father.
It's obviously about inventions in war. And when you think about that, the first one, the first EP is connected to inventions during the Great War. So there we have the Attack of the Dead Man comes in there,
sure,
of course, and it also fits in with future warfare, about the invention of tanks.
And something interesting that I talked about in the Great War, the incredible technology leaps during the Great War, not just poison gas and stuff, or even tanks, but in many ways, the world went from 1870 to 1940 in 4 years. You had mobile X-ray machines, right? Which, how many lives did that save?
Yep.
You had the femur splint, which if you had a broken femur, your thigh bone, in 1914, you had a 90% chance of dying and a 10% chance of surviving. By 1918, it was a 90% chance of surviving and a 10% chance of dying. No, but it's interesting that this is the first, that this is where you start with your, let's say, extended play of that.
And it's gonna go on, and in the next, let's say, year, we're gonna release a couple of more.
Okay.
So
Which I don't know what those are, by the way. I don't know what those are yet.
they are still secret for most people. Let's say we have a song about a hero.
Yeah.
And then we're gonna call that EP Heroes of the Great War.
Okay,
and
cool.
you can guess a couple of them maybe. Who's gonna be on that?
I think there's a whole bunch of heroes of the Great War.
Yeah. And some of our previous songs that's gonna fit into that as well.
Oh, okay, so it's really tying the whole knot.
It's tying up, and it's also to help a lot of people who missed a lot of songs
Yeah.
to rediscover them, to have a chance. I mean,
To go back, so
because
like
we're
Carton
gonna,
de Viart and
yeah,
stuff like that.
exactly
Sure,
like
sure,
that. So
okay.
we're gonna reactivate some of the songs, release new content related to some of the songs,
Okay.
and focus a little bit more on them around the release of the EPs.
But back to Father, the song, but not really the song, more the name. I mean, it's a fairly common-ish name for a song and stuff. I mean, you're not the first band that's ever had a song called Father.
That is true. We sing Fader vår in Carolinens
Of
bön.
course, that's true. That is true. And we sing Our Father, who art in heaven.
But maybe you had some other song in mind.
You know me too well, Per. You know me too well. But I was thinking about Glenn Danzig.
That's Mother.
Yeah, I know. But that's why I think it's Father and Mother. You see
Actually,
what I
that
mean?
popped in my mind as
That's
well.
it. And Pink Floyd, Mother from Dark Side of the Moon stuff. But you've got the two mothers. You've got Father and you've got Father Vor, and you've got Papa Don't Preach by Madonna stuff. But wait, okay, can I hijack this episode for just a second?
Okay.
Do you mind? I'm just gonna hijack this for a second. Glenn Danzig, before Sam Hain and Danzig, they had the Misfits. And when I was in my early teens in Houston, Texas, I was really into punk and new wave. But there was the only radio channel you can get it on was local Rice Radio, and I couldn't even pick that up at night. I lived too far away from the university. The record store. It was like a 20-minute bicycle ride from my house, Hastings Records, which
I know
was
Hastings.
huge. It was biggest part of this compound, and they had one little rack with 3 rows that said punk and new wave, with 3 rows of records. And I would save up my money, because it was like $7.99 to buy. It was a lot of money for a kid then, like if you're 12 or 13 years old. And I would buy a record based on what the record cover looked like. And that's when I got Misfits Walk Among Us, because Misfits looked so cool on Misfits Walk Among Us. So I bought that, which is still one of my favorite albums today ever, which I still think is the best thing Glenn Danzig ever did. No offense to anybody who likes any of his later music and stuff, because I liked him better as a punk. I did.
Okay, I thought that you're gonna say that's where I found Papa Don't Preach.
Oh, no. This was before Papa. This was before
That's a long
Madonna.
time before Madonna.
Madonna was still the drummer in the Breakfast Club then. By the way, there's your trivia for today. Before Madonna became Madonna, she played drums. She was a drummer. She played drums in a band called the Breakfast Club before Madonna became a... Well, so if somebody says, well, what instrument does Madonna play? You can go, drums.
Okay, so I'm going to stop it there. So obviously, I mean, Indy's 10 years older than I just had to go Google that real quick. But he's 100% correct. I remember the old Rice radio. You know, I'm from Houston. I'm outside of Houston now, but I was born inside Houston. Hastings Records, to give you an idea how big it was, you know, if you're familiar with the bigger stores like a Walmart or things like that, it would probably be a half the size of Walmart, you know, or I forget the one in the UK that is always referenced on TV when I watch the British shows that I enjoy. They refer to it all the time, but there's a British version of it where it's this big store. It's got all the discounts in it. Because they always give people crap for going and shopping there. But I mean, it was massive. You know, and then they opened smaller stores. But yeah, I know exactly what Indy's talking about. That brings back a lot of memories with Hastings. Man. And then obviously as CDs faded, you know, the birth of the internet. I mean, a lot of those stores, Sam Goody's, Hastings, all of those just kind of started going out of business because, I mean, online just wrecked them. Man, indie hijacking always brings back memories. Let's finish this one out.
And now, if we can hijack back it.
Yeah, you can hijack it back. Sorry, to Fritz Haber.
To Fritz Haber.
Yeah.
And
we haven't mentioned him yet today.
no, we haven't mentioned him. Does he need a mention? I mean, how do you feel? Like, is it controversial for you to talk about it?
The thing is, okay, throughout history, there have been people that are complete, absolute, amoral, not even unmoral, amoral, with no moral compass, people who have done great for humanity. And I think Fritz Haber is one of those. The fact that there's no remorse for creating weapons that murdered in a horrible way. Being shot in the head, you die. Poison gas, you can have another 60 years with half a lung and, you know, with your eyes burned out and stuff like that. But you cannot deny that synthetic ammonia is one of the great discoveries of the 20th century.
Yeah,
I mean, he absolutely deserved, in pure scientific terms, he deserved the Nobel Prize for that. How do I reconcile that? I have a hard time reconciling it. I think I would not have liked to hang out with Fritz Haber. I think I would. But what do you say?
If we travel back in time, we're gonna avoid him. But we're probably not gonna travel back in time to meet Fritz Haber.
Probably.
We're probably gonna look ahead for new episodes of Sabaton History Channel in the future.
In the future, we can't wait to see you guys there. Don't forget to click subscribe, and don't forget to keep checking your internet for future episodes of Sabaton History.
Thanks for watching.
sorry.
Click that little bell so that you get updates when we release new episodes. And thank you for subscribing.
You know, this again is where I really struggle, and Indy's 100% correct. It's hard to reconcile that. You know, if you look at it from a pure scientific standpoint, he's the father of, you know, something that changed lives and still used today versus what he did during the war. Yeah, I think you just have to leave it at that. I really do. Yeah. I think you have to separate the two, just because it's hard to say, well, he doesn't deserve any credit because he, you know, did all that, but you can't erase facts, right? I mean, that's what's happening in today's society where, you know, history is being deleted just because people don't like it. And yet that's going to cause us to repeat it, whether on the flip side, you know, of some of the things that happened in the past, Yeah, our society's headed to hell. That's just personal opinion. But when it comes to Fritz, yeah, I mean, this is a hard one for me. Great episode, though. I mean, going into that depth and really kind of breaking down the scientific part versus the war part. And then, unfortunately, you know, for him as a human, regardless of what he did from a scientific standpoint, here's a guy that's thriving that could continue to change the world that was just outcast by his own country. And madman. That makes you really just that's a deep thought episode right there, because you really get into morals versus scientific, and that's a tough one. But that's going to do it for that one, because I could probably just sit here and go tough one all day long. But that's going to do it for this one. Hope you enjoy. I'll see you on the next one. Y'all know who I am and what I'm about. I'm JTMM. Like, subscribe, and share. I'm out.